This channel is made possible by viewers like you. My viewers, subscribers, and patrons greatly help to keep this channel going. I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for all of you. Please make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any uploads. And if you'd like to go the extra mile, please check out my Patreon page. For just $1 a month, you'll get access to what I'm working on, previews of upcoming content, and even early videos, along with other tier options for those that are interested. Thank you, and now on to the video. When you saw the name Visceral Games, a few of their titles probably immediately came to your mind, the incredibly good original Dead Space games being one of them, or maybe even their underrated action-adventure Dante's Inferno. And before they were even known as Visceral, they were making a name for themselves with high-quality licensed games. They had their hands in franchise adaptations for The Godfather, The Lord of the Rings, and James Bond. Visceral Games, or known as Redwood Shores before that, was a studio who made many memorable titles. But what was their first game, the game that essentially started it all for this talented studio? Oddly enough, the studio started out with a mech-based shooter that would end up being one of the PS1's underrated and forgotten gems. Let us explore the making of Future Cop LAPD. The Strike series began in 1992 with Desert Strike, and saw a few releases over the next few years. This was a shoot-'em-up of sorts where the player would control a helicopter and rain down all kinds of destruction. The sequels followed with Jungle and Urban Strike, and then by 1996 we saw the first entry released on the PlayStation with Soviet Strike, and this was followed up by Nuclear Strike. New elements, features, and even vehicles were added in to provide the players with even more. But then there was a cutscene that was found within Nuclear Strike. This gave a sneak peek at a mech of sorts, and it was titled Future Strike, showing that there would be a strong shift to focusing much of the action on the ground this time around. A new studio was created, known as EA Redwood Shores, and they were tasked with making the next title within the Strike series. The action would be focused more on controlling ground vehicles, along with featuring elements and action that fans of the Strike series have come to enjoy. But as the project evolved, Future Strike became less of a direct sequel and more of a spin-off to the Strike series, and this is where Future Cop LAPD was born. EA Redwood Shores was a very small team working at EA Games. For reference, they were very small, with the sports side of EA Games making most of the money on those titles. So for EA Redwood Shores, there was a great deal of freedom that they had to play with, since as one of the developers cites, management wasn't really paying attention to this team. Much of the team members were part of an older division within EA, known as EA Tools Group. The department was closed, but they had experience on making games for the 3DO. Redwood was tasked with working on the next entry within the Strike series. Future Strike in its very early form would feature a transforming mech that could turn into a helicopter, representing some of that similarity to the other Strike entries. While the prior game Nuclear Strike sold well, it didn't sell well enough for EA to want to continue the series. This is where the project began to pivot into more of a spin-off of the Strike series, rather than a direct sequel. Before the team settled on that urban cop setting, other ideas were tossed around during the conceptual phase. One idea was heavily influenced by the Mad Max films and the Fallout games by having the player be a wasteland nomad. The mech would still be front and center, with options for exploration and needing to contend with various violent conflicts. But EA's marketing had another idea in mind for the project. Marketing was very adamant that they could sell the idea of a cop-centered game, rather than a wasteland-like experience. The setting for Future Cop began to take shape, with it being in the not-too-distant future, so that the game could have a mix of present-day and sci-fi-like elements peppered throughout the experience. Judge Dredd was used as inspiration, as the law enforcement within this world would be judge, jury, and executioner. Crime has completely taken over the city. The cops are outnumbered, and special units armed with mechs are called in to help keep the peace. Oddly enough, with Redwood Shores being located in LA, the entire team thought it would be great to use this as their location for the game. Future Cop would feature well-known locations as levels for the run-and-gun experience. So the team had their setting and direction to go in. Future Cop LAPD would feature the player using a mech to battle the crime-filled streets of LA. At any point in the game, the player could transform their mech into a hover car, which would provide them with even more options. along with allowing for some player personalization on how they want to express themselves in the moment of combat. Both vehicles would be needed to complete each mission, but it would be up to the player to decide the best time to use each side of their arsenal. The mech and hover car would feature a wide selection of weapons to use, and more can be unlocked as the player successfully reduces the crime. Future Comp would allow for some weapon customization, as the player could equip a few weapons at the same time. At the start of the mission, the player would make their selection. The team was using a new engine not used with the prior Strike games. In fact, it was pulled from their work on the Shockwave games before they became Redwood. This engine was impressive in that it allowed for many characters to be displayed moving at once. Members of the team would be dedicated to figuring out how the mech would work for their game. This would be how it would operate, the shooting, what weapons could be used, and who the player would be facing. This resulted in the team exploring different gameplay ideas and situations that the player would need to overcome to keep the variety consistently engaging. The studio would come up with some interesting tricks to allow for both scale and cinematic moments. For example, Future Comp would feature crowd-like combat moments with a large number of gunmen running around. In order to get all of them to fit in the game at once, the camera would zoom in on the mech and these foes, both allowing for the scale to work for the engine and provide a dynamic camera movement to heighten the action as well. The team loved their project, and they worked to try to make something that each of them would enjoy playing. They hoped that this could be something that EA could eventually turn into a franchise. Future Comp would feature two main game modes, Crime War and Precinct Assault. Crime War would be the story-based mode where the player would be using their X1 Alpha to battle various crime lords in LA. This would be the main single-player campaign, but the team did want to include co-op and multiplayer options. Crime War could be played in two-player co-op, and interesting enough, both players would actually share the same health bar. This was done to encourage really working with your partner through each of the situations, because if your health bar hits 0, then it's game over for both players. Precinct Assault was a mode added in late into development, and would be a rather different kind of offering. This would be the multiplayer mode, and would feature adding a layer of strategy to the action, and flipping it a bit than what was seen in Crime War. There would be bases, turrets, and outposts. The objective would be to get your team's tanks into the other team's base to win. Some even cite this mode as being the first iteration of a multiplayer online battle arena, or commonly known as a MOBA. Little did this development team know that they were actually creating an entirely new genre. It is important to note too that Future Comp was developed at the same time for the PS1, PC, and Mac. This was no easy task for a small team to achieve, but they wanted to be part of releasing more games on Mac. EA had not released a Mac title in years, and Future Comp would change that. Based on what I could find from the development, there was a large focus to make this game on Mac first. It's no easy feat to develop a game for just one platform, but for 3 at the same time really showed the dedication of these developers. This was a team falling in love with their own creation. These developers would be working 12 to 15-hour days for 6 days a week to better and complete their game. This was a great example of passion, talent, and drive being seen throughout the entire project. What started off as the next entry within the Strike series ended up turning into something all its own. The history of the Strike series could be seen here, but Future Comp was something that was becoming unique and even genre creating with one of its modes. Redwood Shores was able to release a high quality game on 3 different platforms at the same time. The review scores were very favorable for the game, and more importantly, the players greatly enjoyed this title. The development team felt that EA did not give Future Comp a fair shake. Future Comp was a very good game, but it was not that big blockbuster that EA was looking for. This resulted in EA not really knowing what to do with this title, along with potential future titles for this. And while the marketing team was excited about the cop concept early on, by the time the game took more of its finished form, the marketing had a hard time figuring out the best way to push this title out. The other sides of EA lacked the love for the project that was found within each member of the development team. The team cited that the entire printed run of the game sold, but the numbers were not high enough and actually resulted in poor sales. This ended up resulting in Future Comp LA turning into being more of a cult classic game, whereas the team felt that this could have been so much more. While the sales may not have been as strong as EA wanted, it seems like management and marketing should have really backed this project more. Future Comp LAPD greatly showed that Redwood Shores was starting very strong, and like I said at the start, there were many great games to come from them in the future. Thank you very much for taking the time to join me as we took a look back at how this underrated and overlooked cult classic was made. Have you ever played Future Comp, or was this a title that you missed from the PlayStation catalog. Or maybe you played it on PC or Mac. Let me know all of this in the comments down below. If you're interested in being notified of new videos, please hit the subscribe button and bell. And if you would like to support the channel and get early access to content, please check out my Patreon. All of the links will be at the end of this video and within the description. And thank you very much for watching.